Welcome back to DCO Podcast. Another solo episode from me today. This will probably be the final one before me and Ben tackle some of the big new releases that have been coming out. With that being said, this video I'm going to be talking about and reviewing two new records that I've seen a bit of discussion around that have mostly been overshadowed by the other huge albums released at this time. These albums I'm going to talk about are Black British Music 2025 by Jim Legxacy and Rest in Bass by Che. Now, the UK underground rap scene seems to be going through a bit of a resurgence recently. I myself have become much more aware of artists such as Fake Mink, who was recently platformed by Drake at Wireless Festival, and of course Jim Legxacy. Both of them are bringing something quite unique to the table, both production-wise and vocally, and having gotten so used to the grime sound that the UK is often known for, it's really nice to see that there are UK rap artists pushing it, starting new waves in the genre here. To be honest, I don't even know what subgenre could categorise this new Jim Legxacy album. There are so many fusions going on in each song, with strong elements of pop rap, afro beats and jerk pulsing through the record. In all honesty, I almost find it hard to call it a rap album, with the amount of melodic depth that Jim brings with his vocal performances. This is certainly far from what I pictured a UK rap album could be. In terms of what I really loved about the album, Jim does a great job of matching the emotion of the production with his vocals, and this is really the case in standout tracks such as '06 Wayne Rooney and Issues of Trust, the former of which provides sentimental reverb-drenched lyrics over a stellar soft rock beat, which also contains a really catchy hook that really elevates the song to another level. The single from the album, Father, also sees Jim looking back on his life and his struggles, this time over upbeat jerk production. It also utilises a chipmunk sample, which Jim allows to thread its way into the lyrics that he is rapping. The chipmunk sample is a feature that is used on a number of the songs from the album, and I'm really happy that it's not overused to the point of the listener's annoyance, but more sparingly and considerately. While the album does make use of multiple genres, I do also think it is worth noting that despite the variety of the production, it still maintains a dark and moody sort of nighttime vibe that really ties the songs together. I do have a few reservations about the album. Firstly, I do feel like Jim's vocal approach to songs does become slightly repetitive after a point. This is not really something that bothers me if I split my listening of the album up, but honestly, considering that listening to the album in its entirety takes little over half an hour, I do feel like it's a valid point to mention. Also, I do think there are low points on the album, with songs such as Sun and Tiger Driver 91, where I do find the production and song structure to be a little bit too basic, and that together with the moody vibe that it takes form in, as well as the laid-back vocals on Sun, means that they are quite sleepy tracks. Despite this, I do think there are definitely more hits than misses on the album, and the high points are really something special, which is why I would give it a 7 out of 10. Moving on to Che's Rest in Bass, which is, for the most part, a really hard-hitting and abrasive rage album. Now, rage music is something that I only really have a base level knowledge of, with rage projects such as Whole Lotta Red and Trip at Night, which are often claimed to be projects that kick-started the sound, but these are really the only ones that I'm familiar with. I do like these projects, but more for the ideas they present rather than the execution. I find that neither of the artists managed to put out a consistent track list, and with Trip at Night especially, there wasn't really enough variation in production and vocal performance too, as the album went on. Around 4 years have passed since those projects released now, and a new generation has now adopted the sound, with artists such as Ken Carson, Destroy Lonely and Yeet being at the forefront. While I admit that I haven't really invested much time into listening to these artists, I will say that what I have heard by them hasn't really given me cause to look deeper. For me, none of these artists have matched what Trippie and Carti did on their respective projects, despite the imperfections that they may have. For one, the mixing on many of the new Rage songs leaves much to be desired in my opinion, with 808s often being boosted and distorted to the point where the listener is really presented with essentially a wall of sound, in which many of the different elements of the instrumentals sort of clash together to the point that no one thing can be heard clearly other than maybe the vocals. With this in mind, when I saw this new Che album, Rest in Bass, being praised, I was skeptical to say the least, but I headed to the gym with the album ready to go, and to be honest, on first listen I thought it was fine. There were certainly highlights on the album, but I felt it was very hit or miss. The production seemed to go from stellar to the indistinct wall of sound that I mentioned earlier, but I did really feel like the high energy of the production was matched by Che. However, now after several listens during the week, I can honestly say that I am captivated by this album. Sure, I still think there are low points. The mixing on the song Rolling Stone, for example, doesn't really do it for me, but after sitting with the album for a little bit now, and listening to it in many different settings and on different headphones, I genuinely can't fault the vast majority of the production on this thing. The energy that almost every instrumental has is phenomenal, and I can honestly say that this is the only pure rage album that I've listened to where I feel like it is varied enough to be able to keep you interested throughout. Che himself, though, really does bring a great energy to the tracks, and while some of the bars he presents can be seen as a bit basic, it is sort of just the nature of the game with this type of music, and I do feel it would be unfair of me to be too critical with regards to this. With that being said though, Che does bring some really catchy hooks and melodic vocals to many of the songs. The tracks that have stood out to me the most are the ones that I've found to have the most catchy production, but also vocals that are just full of confidence and self-assurance. Lip Filler, Black Swan, Mannequin and Bass are all standouts to me. Die Young is really the only song where I felt that Che's performance was particularly subpar. Repetition is something that I do expect in this type of music, but I feel like what you're saying does have to be catchy for it to not just come across as annoying. The constant repetition of "pop it" and not a particularly strong chorus makes this song really stick out to me as the main weakness on the track list. In terms of vocal approach, however, I do see many similarities between Carti and Che, with even some of the ad-libs being near identical. However, I didn't really find this to be to the extent where I felt that Che was unoriginal. The beats that he's rapping over, for example, are much more dense than a typical Carti song, and I feel like Che's really put together a much more consistent project with the sound than Carti offered, and has really offered since Die Lit in 2018. If Carti made the prototype, then this new album is as close to the finished package as I've heard, with it sort of coming across as much more intense than some of the similar stuff that I've heard from Carti. And that is why I'm going to give this album an 8 out of 10. And with that, that is the end of the video. I was really impressed by both artists' work, and to be honest, I hadn't really heard much from either of them, and up until recently I didn't realise how young they both were. Che especially, as he's only 18, but with both artists I do feel like this is a really solid foundation for them to build off, and I'm sure they're only just getting started. Now, if you've listened to either or both of these albums, I would love to know your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. And thank you so much for watching.